The question that we are going to start with tonight, I'm hoping to cover three questions. Question number 13 is, how can we teach children to be content rather than always wanting something more? So Philippians chapter 4, verse 9, first of all, those things which you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me do, and the God of peace shall be with you. But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at the last your care of me has flourished again, wherein you were also careful, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatever state I am therewith to be content. He goes on to say, I know both how to be abased, I know how to abound, I know everywhere and in all things I am instructed, I am taught, I am initiated, actually, both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. So I guess my starting point on teaching children about contentment is that it has to start with the parents. And that might be the toughest part of this, because much of what we would learn, we would be able to instruct our children in a virtue like contentment is something that they would pick up in us and learn the value of. And so these verses certainly do give some important principles. And I was thinking, first of all, just verse 9, those things that you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me do. So if we think from the role of the parent or the parents, we should be able to say that to our children, things that you have learned, received, heard, and seen in me do. And so that's the first question, is what do we model in our day-to-day life? Do we model contentment and thankfulness? And I think it's important to add thankfulness to it, because it does really come back to an attitude towards God, first of all, that God gives us what we have. He provides for us. He enables us to earn a living and to enjoy many things. And so what do we really model? Do we model that kind of thankfulness, gratitude? And that's something we could certainly try to pass on to our children, to express thankfulness to God for what we have, and so that they are raised in that atmosphere of our thankfulness to God for what we have. The contrast, of course, is materialism. And with materialism usually becomes stress over financial things, which we've touched on a bit earlier, and even quarreling about spending. And if we remember that about half of the divorces that take place are due to financial stress, we know that obviously many parents are not providing a good example for their children. Another thing I was thinking about is, and I remember, when many years ago now, it would be 1978, actually, Christmas time. In the first couple of months of 1979, Becky and I went down to visit my brother David and his wife in Chile, as they were missionaries. And just being exposed to a different country and a different economic level, when we came back, it was almost like a culture shock to see the prosperity that we had here. And actually, Chile is considered to be relatively stable and middle class compared to many of the other countries down in South America. So the point I just wanted to draw attention to is that it's helpful to help our children to realize that we have so much more than millions of people elsewhere, and also some people who are even around us. And so I think something that would be very, very valuable to do for our children would be to show to them, to model for them, not only contentment in ourselves and thankfulness to God, but also generosity and kindness to people who have much less. And so we can certainly teach some of these principles to our children, and they can witness the joy of both giving and receiving. It's sad if the only joy we have is when we get something new. That doesn't last very long. So I was also thinking of 1 Timothy 6, which is along the same line. 1 Timothy 6, I might have read this earlier when we were taking up finances as well. Verse 17 says, charge them that are rich in this world that they be not high-minded nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who gives us richly all things to enjoy. And then the exhortation is that they do good, be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate or to share, and so on. But just this phrase, the living God who gives us richly all things to enjoy. So I think it is suitable. So there's some balancing principles I think we need to give. That is, it's good for us to reflect God's character. God is gracious. He's generous. He does give us richly. And so poverty is not an expression of godliness necessarily at all. It may be just poor management. It may be lack of ambition. There are many things that are or could be involved in poverty. But God is good, and he does love to bless us with things to enjoy. So I don't think it's wrong for parents to want to give our children what we can, to show kindness to them, to show generosity to them, to show compassion to them as they're growing up. But at the same time, we have to remember what's called the law of diminishing return. And that principle is being lived out in many wealthy families, and some who aren't necessarily wealthy, we would consider them more middle class. But the thing simply is this: the more you pamper and flood either yourself or your children with easy money and gifts, the less valuable it becomes. Now, I remember reading a book basically around this whole principle, and I don't remember the exact amount. It was based on the American economy and American dollars and so on. But it was quite an interesting book, really. Basically, the thesis was that up to a certain level, as you increase in wealth, it does benefit you in many ways. You can live more comfortably, there's less stress financially, and so on, up to a certain level. And then from that point on, basically when it meets your needs and life is reasonably comfortable, once it gets into the wants and that range and luxury and more luxury, it very quickly begins to diminish. And the more you have, the less satisfied you are. And so that's not always what we think of when we see wealthy people. But I remember reading the story of one man who was very, very successful. He, started out in poverty and achieved tremendous success and wealth. But later he lamented the fact that his own sons, as they got into, approaching adulthood, they had no appreciation for all that they had, and they had no ambition to achieve something with their life. And so that's one of the sad detriments of over flooding with many things. And so, of course, many of us who wouldn't put ourselves in that kind of category, we can still run into this similar trap just simply because of easy credit. Because credit lets you buy things that you really may not be able to properly afford, and it disguises the pain of paying for it and so on. And so we do have to acknowledge that we are living in the most highly marketed generation in history. And no wonder we have a challenge to actually think in terms of contentment. There's a continual bombardment to entice us to want something more. So basically, in that framework, then, I think it is essential for us to train our children in financial wisdom, to learn principles like self-control and the ability to wait for being able to have something. And there's a joy in being able to achieve something. So we should try to, on one hand, be kind and generous and caring for our children. On the other hand, to realize that we could be actually causing detriment to them if we don't allow them to have to wait for something and have to work for something. And so it's good for children to discover how much things cost and how much work is required to earn something, money for a particular item, and to let them learn to earn, to save up in order to purchase something. Now, I got thinking about, there's an organization called Focus on the Family, which I used to listen to a fair bit, and used to read a lot of books by Dr. James Dobson, who is the founder of Focus on the Family. And I think there's probably, radio programs that probably carry their material weekly, if not daily. But I did go online and saw one interview that they had with Dave Ramsey, who I believe is a Christian financial counselor you may have heard of. And so the question was raised about allowances. What about allowances or paying children for chores? And so he expressed his preference for paying children for certain things, for certain chores or jobs, rather than a stated allowance. And he basically suggested the idea of an allowance, which, I don't remember what we did exactly with our own children. I think we sort of did an allowance, but not all the time. And also did, pay them for certain jobs and so on. So anyway, he suggested three categories, to divide sort of things up into three categories. And the first category is simply, you do things around the house or around the farm or wherever it is because I said so, and because we need some help, and you're part of the family. And because you're part of this family, it's, yes, you go out and whatever it is, help feed the chickens or feed the cat or whatever it may be, take care of the dog. And you can, as a family, it'd be good to brainstorm, to think about what are the responsibilities in this family? What kind of things do we need to be done? And what can the children, as they, grow up a little bit, what can they begin to do to contribute to help? So that's the first category, just simply because they ought to help, because they're part of the family. Then the second one is specifically for the mother, and that is to help out mom, to show love to her. And I think that's a kind of a nice thought, to me at least, because I think it's been recognized in many families that the mother does double duty. She serves everybody. And it was something that I remember noticing with our own children, was that if I did something for them, they would thank me. But if Becky did something for them, they didn't think to thank her, because it's just mom does all, it's just mom does all these things, or it's mom's job to do everything around the house. And so it certainly is something to, as a family, to say, yes, children, to help mom do certain jobs, because, mom is your mom, and she pours out her heart for you, and it's good to do that. But then the third category is to train them to connect work with earning income, because that is an important preparation for the adult world. And as I mentioned, he suggested that being a preference to do that rather than a kind of a fixed allowance. And so, again, that's age dependent, and I have to leave it up to you to think about how you could do that. And he suggested, a fairly deliberate thing of making a chore chart and checking off when these jobs are done, and then at the end of the week, to have payday, and then further to when they do get paid, to have that money divided into three categories again. And the first category is savings, and the second category is spending, and the third category that he suggests is giving. And so I would leave that up to you to decide on what that would mean for you. But it is actually something very valuable for children to begin to learn the value of money, relating it to things that they use, things that they have, things that the family purchases. And he says it's okay to allow them to make mistakes. Whatever the spending category is, proportion, if they go and blow it on one thing and don't have anything for the next month or 2 months, well, that's the way it is. And to learn lessons. He said it's far better to learn the lessons while they're children growing up rather than in their mid-30s. And then he suggested encouraging initiative and taking responsibility for finding jobs in the teen years. So that's some suggestions. I'm not sure if I've really answered the question so much on how to teach them to be content, but I think it's just simply, if you keep satisfying their whims continually, those whims will just continue, and they will not learn satisfaction. It's important for them to be able to learn satisfaction through waiting and achieving, and then being able to have it, and then they value it much more. Another thing I would suggest is, if something that they do have gets broken, try to fix it, try to repair it, and so on. So there's many ways that you can work to help the children value what they do have